Hello, well this video comes to you from Rachel Terry and she's writing about the death of Curley's wife. Let's see how she does. In the passage, Steinbeck mentions how Curley's wife struggled violently under his hands. This quote implies how violent men were towards women in the 1930s, and this reflects how women had little control. Yes, you can just about argue that, but it would help if you use the word symbolically, or so that this isn't literal. You could argue how it's Curley's fault she ended up on the ranch in the first place, and her fault for getting into a violent act with Lenny. Well, if you are going to argue that, you have to say why. So why would you argue it? And if you can't, then don't put it in. However, women of the 1930s didn't have much of a choice. Their status was much beneath men. Many women faced extreme hardship and poverty, which meant that they had to sell themselves for money. Well, they didn't actually have to sell themselves for money. You're suggesting that that's the common experience of most women at the time, and that's not the case. And indeed, we know it's not the case with Curley's wife, because she was living at home with her mother. She can't be more than 17 years old. The first guy she tells Lenny about at the dance palace was when she was only 15. So you're making a sweeping generalization here, which doesn't help you. If you compare the life that Curley's wife would have had to face, then her decision of living a life on the ranch doesn't seem all that bad. Well, that may be true, but you've got to be specific. What exactly was the life she was living? Especially since she wouldn't have been able to make her dreams of being in the pictures come true anyway, due to the unfortunate circumstances. Well, no, not really, because you're then suggesting if it hadn't been for the Great Depression, she could have been a film star, which actually isn't what the book is saying at all. Well, we're supposed to see her ambition to be in pictures as naive, and it indicates her youth and also indicates how she really doesn't understand the ways of the world. Steinbeck presents Curley's wife's death in a tortuous way to make us feel sympathy for her and take into consideration how the way we treat women can have a great effect on them. Therefore, we should be more respectful. Well, that's a bit of a leap. Lenny, of course, is very respectful towards Curley's wife, treats her quite gently in many ways to start with, and that ends up in her death. So this isn't a well fleshed out argument. Another quote from the passage states how Lenny, well, that's interesting because you haven't really quoted from the passage, really. And you want to get to quote from the passage in your first sentence, or certainly in the first couple. So this is where your essay really starts to score marks, where you start looking at language. The fact that Lenny pawed the hay means that Steinbeck is relating him to an animal, possibly a bear, since he has been compared to this in an earlier chapter of the novel. Okay. The fact that Lenny behaves in this way suggests he can be a very dangerous character. When this is contrasted with Curley's wife's fragile innocence, it once again manipulates the reader into thinking she didn't deserve to die and how it possibly should have been the other way around. Well, this is a really sophisticated idea now. Not just that we feel sympathy for Curley's wife, but you're introducing this unusual idea that we think Lenny should be the one to be killed. You could back that up, but you don't. So although it's a brilliant, different way of looking at the novel, you haven't shown why. From the passage it also states how, and he stroked her harder. This is quite an important quote because it's evidence for the fact that Lenny didn't know no rules. When someone doesn't know any rule, it means they're able to turn to their basic instinct, which for men is usually to kill, according to the novel. Yes, you've made a good case there. Lenny lost control of himself, right in the present please. Lenny loses control of himself when he is with Curley's wife and gets carried away. The fact that he has a mental illness explains why he does this. However, we know from the novel that Slim is the only one who realises this. Well, is it? I think you'll find George. Maybe you meant George. And in the end, he still think it's better off if he's dead. No, you did mean Slim. Which implies how people with mental illnesses were not helped and looked after during the 1930s. in America. The impact of this may make the reader feel less sorry for Curley's wife and pay more attention to Lenny because of how he can't control what he's doing, nor the punishment he will receive afterwards. Okay, your essay's getting better, but it's the death of Curley's wife that you need to be writing about. And you've started to stray a bit from that to write about the mental illness. So this bit doesn't really sit with the passage too well. In the rest of the novel, how does Steinbeck present the brutality of life on the ranch? Well, before we move on, you've got quite a few quotations in here, but very few from the actual passage itself. And you need to be aware of that. You want to make many more quotations about the actual passage. That close analysis of language will get you higher marks. In the rest of the novel, Steinbeck presents the brutality of life on the ranch in many different ways. Well, that's general, it's waffly. Be specific. What's he doing with the presentation of brutality? Every character was discriminated against for something and causing conflict. That's much better. And brutal behaviour to arise. So you're saying, I hope, that the brutal behaviour comes from discrimination, which is a sophisticated idea. Let's see if you pull it off in the next paragraph. In the 1930s in America, there was lots of racism and segregation between black and white people. We know this for definite because blah, blah, blah. Well, we don't need any of that. We don't need any of this because it's not really relevant. You've said that there was lots of racism and we accept it. So Crook symbolises racism in the novel during a time when no one took into consideration their thoughts and feelings. The other characters behaved brutally towards him because Steinbeck wanted the reader to understand how cruel and harsh white people were being to black people for doing absolutely nothing wrong. Okay. An occurrence where a character treats him insignificantly is when Curley's wife mentions how I could get you strung up to a tree so easy it ain't even funny. Curley's wife may not be very high up in the social class system at the time. However, she's still above Crook's, therefore enjoys having control for once and being able to use her power to torture somebody else as revenge for all the times the men on the ranch use harsh language towards her like bitch, rat trap, poison and tart. So this is by far your best paragraph. All your quotations are integrated brilliantly and you're answering the question about the brutality of life, and you have started to prove that the brutality arrives because of discrimination. So this is a much, much stronger part of your essay than part A. Therefore, Crook's face lighted with pleasure in his torture. Oh, sorry, I missed a line there, I apologise. Although just like Curley's wife enjoyed taking advantage of Crook's, Crook's also does the same to Lenny because he's below Crook's status due to his mental illness. Therefore, Crook's face lighted with pleasure in his torture. Steinbeck may have done this to prove that actually both white and black are capable of evil, or that since we treated blacks in such an awful way, black people were going to do the same. The language once again emphasises the brutality and conflict between different members of the ranch, and you've cleverly brought it back to this idea of brutality that was in your question, the brutality of life on the ranch. So this again is scoring much more highly. Secondly, Candy has his dog shot on the ranch by Carlson, who claims it's for his own good. He explains how the dog is old and stinks. Steinbeck uses the dog to represent Candy himself, and they both act as a symbol of ageism in the novel to inform the reader how society treats old people. The fact that Carlson killed Candy's dog with his Luger, wrong spelling of Luger by the way, and told him how it was for his own good, exemplifies to the reader how actually Carlson just constantly wants to kill, which reveals the brutal side of masculinity. Again, you can see how you keep coming back to the question, so you're always answering the question, and you're skillfully interweaving these one-word quotations into your response. Once again, the novel is indicating how white men are in charge, and at this time, and how old people will end up being got rid of once they're no longer useful, just like Candy's dog. Society was therefore brutal in the 1930s. Thirdly, there is even brutality between the companionship, so it's a clumsily phrased, but between Lenny and George. We know this because George says, "God Almighty, if I was alone, I could live so easy." This snappy remark implies how many of the people on the ranch don't think before they speak, since he later apologises for his language. It appears that George has now given up violence towards Lenny. However, he still manages to end up shooting him in the final chapter, which is an act of brutality towards another character. So you're not really making a point about George's brutality here. You're taking a long time to get to your point, unlike the previous paragraphs, which were packed full of ideas and quotations. Right, although if George was a Christian at the time, then you could argue that the quote may have been a prayer to be released from Lenny. If this is to be the case, then George did Lenny a favour in the end, because otherwise he would have been killed and tortured by Curley. Well, that's the normal view, but you've introduced a different view, that he actually wants to be released from Lenny. So killing Lenny is a favour to George, not a favour to Lenny, if you follow this idea through. So if you can, you should, and if you can't, you should leave it out and go straight with this one. The fact that Lenny was thinking about the American dream at the time he got shot could also indicate that actually he's going to heaven, especially since he didn't have any sense of control when he killed Curley's wife. Yeah, that's very valid, but it's not relevant to this question yet, because you haven't linked it back to this idea of brutality of life on the ranch. So it's not relevant yet. Overall, Steinbeck presents brutality on the ranch in a number of different ways to emphasize how 1930s America actually was. Well, you haven't said how it was in this conclusion, and you haven't said anything about the ways, so this is just waffle, really. He wants to make the reader understand how they're treating each other is morally wrong and needs to be changed. So this is becoming more specific. We know this because it appears that Crook's existence in the novel actually has no effect on the actual storyline. That's true enough, but you're ending with a point about Crooks when you've just been writing about Lenny and George, so it doesn't really belong there. Your conclusion instead should actually be about the ending of the novel, what that has to say about brutality, and how Steinbeck might want social change. So this is a really difficult essay to mark, because we had certainly the first few paragraphs of Part B being far, far superior to Part A, where you don't quote enough and look at the passage, and you've got a weak conclusion and a little bit of a problem with structure, where you chuck Crooks in here, where really Crooks belongs up there. So let's have a quick look at the mark scheme. So here's the examiner's gut reaction. They'll start down here. Is it explained? Does it have details? Yes, it does. Has it got some context in it? Yes, it does. Right, let's move up. Is it a sustained response? Well, difficult this one, isn't it? Because of the variability of Part A and Part B. Is there effective use of detail? Yes. Have you explained the effects of language? Yes. Have you got sustained response to context? Yes, probably. And you've got effective detail. Okay, so now I'm going to come up to band 4. There is some thoughtful consideration in those paragraphs I showed were really good. The details were linked to interpretation, but not all the way through. Is it a qualified response? Yes, it is. Part of it was good, part of it wasn't. Okay, so I'm in the mark band here, and I've just got to choose where I think I'm going to put it within that range. So I'll let you do that, having seen the essay. And that will put you in the middle of the mark range, won't it? So good luck with your revision. I hope this hasn't been too painful. It's always very brave when students put their work up to be marked. If you'd like further videos, you know what to do. Get subscribing. Thank you.